The message was already sent by the time they called me into the room. I was halfway through a cold cup of coffee when Director Heron Webb walked through the door of my office at the United Nations Diplomatic Center in Geneva, placed a single data tablet on my desk, and said, "You have been appointed Earth's first ambassador to the Galactic Council. Your transport leaves in 4 hours." He did not ask if I wanted the position. Nobody asked. That was how things worked now. My name is Yara Okonkwo. I had spent 13 years negotiating trade agreements between nations that could barely agree on the price of grain. I had never negotiated anything that involved beings from another star. No human had. 6 months earlier, the concept of another civilization existing beyond our solar system was still a theory. Then we turned on our new faster-than-light communication array, the result of 18 years of secret international research, and heard the galaxy for the first time. It was loud. Not in the way a crowd is loud. It was loud the way a city is loud when you press your ear against the ground. Thousands of signals layered on top of each other, most of them in languages that had been speaking to each other for longer than humanity had been walking upright. Trade routes, political announcements, military dispatches, art broadcasts, arguments. The galaxy had been doing business without us for a very long time. We listened for 4 months before anyone knew we were listening. What we found changed everything. The Galactic Council, a governing body of over 200 recognized civilizations, had a classification system for every species it had encountered. Most species spent centuries climbing that system. Humanity had been quietly assigned a rank without our knowledge. Class 7, Unproven Primitive. The lowest tier. The category reserved for species that had not yet achieved faster-than-light travel and were therefore considered irrelevant to galactic affairs. We had achieved faster-than-light communication 16 months ago. But they did not know that yet. While they did not know, we listened. And what we heard during those 4 months of silence was not flattering. The Drax hegemony, the largest military power in the known galaxy, a civilization that had absorbed 53 other worlds through what they diplomatically called integration, had issued an internal directive to its senior admirals. The directive referenced Earth's solar system by coordinate. It referenced our natural resources. It referenced a timeline for what they called pre-colonization survey deployment. They were sending ships to our solar system. Not to introduce themselves. Not to make contact. They were sending ships to look at what we had and decide how much of it they wanted. Director Webb told me all of this in my office while I sat very still and held my cold coffee and did not say a single word. When he finished, I asked only one question. What did we send them? He reached across the desk and turned the tablet toward me. On the screen was humanity's official response to the Galactic Council. Not the Drax hegemony specifically, the entire council. Every civilization. Every listening post in the known galaxy. Sent on a universal broadcast frequency, sent simultaneously in every recognized galactic language, using encryption keys that the Council believed only they possessed. Keys we had quietly decoded during our 4 months of listening. The message was 4 words. Stay away from Earth. No explanation. No greeting. No diplomatic pleasantries. No signature other than the coordinates of our sun. I read it twice. Then I looked up at Webb. When? 3 hours ago, he said. The Council received it 11 minutes after transmission. We are monitoring their internal channels now. He paused. They went quiet. Ambassador. All of them. 200 civilizations. The entire Council communication network dropped to near-zero traffic within minutes of receiving the message. I set the coffee down. How long has it been since the network was that quiet? Webb checked something on his own tablet. Our analysts say approximately never. I stood up and walked to my office window. Outside, Geneva moved the way it always did, organized, calm, indifferent to the fact that humanity had just announced itself to the galaxy with the interstellar equivalent of a warning sign on a fence. Not a hello. Not a request for membership. Not a carefully worded diplomatic overture drafted by a committee of experts over several years. 4 words. Sent without hesitation. I thought about the Drax hegemony. I thought about their fleet. I thought about what they expected to find at the edge of our solar system. A primitive species that would either not notice them coming or would have no power to stop them when they arrived. I picked up my bag. You said my transport leaves in 4 hours. Yes. Then I need 3 hours and 50 minutes to prepare. I paused. Give me the full Council language database. Every intercepted Drax communication from the last 8 months. And a proper cup of coffee. Webb almost smiled. Already loaded on the tablet. I was on the transport before I let myself feel it. The weight of what had just happened. Humanity had listened to the galaxy for 4 months. We had heard what was coming. And instead of panicking, instead of reaching out with apologies and offers of submission and requests for protection, we had sent one message. 4 words. And 200 civilizations had gone silent. I pressed my forehead against the cold window of the transport as the lights of Geneva disappeared below me. And I thought about what that silence meant. Somewhere out there, in council chambers built before Rome existed, beings who had governed star systems for thousands of years were sitting with our forward message on their screens and wondering what kind of species sends a warning before it says hello. The kind, I thought, that means it. I did not know then what the next year would bring. I did not know about the archive or the engagement or the conversation that would change the way the galaxy thought about boundaries. I only knew what Director Webb had told me before I left his office. They are expecting a primitive, he said. Give them something they have never seen before. I had nodded. Then I had walked out the door without looking back. The galaxy had received its warning. Now it was my turn to introduce myself. The council station was older than most human civilizations, and it looked it. Not in a decayed way. Old the way a mountain is old, solid, patient, slightly beyond comprehension. It orbited a dim red star at the edge of neutral space, a structure so large that my transport's approach took 45 minutes from the point where it first filled the entire forward viewport. 19 connected rings, each one housing the delegations of dozens of species, rotating at different speeds to simulate different gravitational preferences. I was the first human to board it. There was no reception committee. No formal welcome. A small automated drone led me through a corridor that smelled faintly of something I could not identify. Not unpleasant, just completely alien, and deposited me at the entrance to the human delegation suite. The room had been prepared. Technically, there was furniture sized for a human body. A breathable atmosphere. A communication terminal. What the room did not have was a window. Every other delegation suite I passed had a full panoramic view of space. Mine faced an interior wall. I noted this, and said nothing. I spent my first 8 hours aboard reading intercepted council communications. The reaction to humanity's message had evolved from stunned silence into something more complicated. The smaller civilizations were cautious. The older ones were dismissive. The council's record showed they had seen aggressive posturing from primitive species before, and it rarely amounted to anything. The Val-Thor consensus, whose elder speaker served as the council's sitting chair, had issued an internal opinion: monitor. Do not engage. Class 7 behavior often resolves itself. And then there was the Drax hegemony. Their internal communications had not gone quiet. They had gotten louder. The hegemony's senior admiral, a being whose title translated roughly as First Expansion Commander, had issued a direct response to humanity's message within hours of receiving it. Not to us. To the Council. He called our warning an amusing display of primitive territorial instinct, and announced that the survey fleet would proceed as scheduled. 14 vessels. Entering our outer solar system within 3 weeks. I requested an audience with the Council's full chamber on my second morning aboard the station. The request was acknowledged. I was assigned a slot in 21 days. 21 days. I sent a message back to Director Webb marked urgent. He replied within the hour. The reply contained 2 pieces of information. The first was that Earth's long-range tracking systems had confirmed the Drax survey fleet trajectory. The second was that Earth had already responded. 2 of the 14 Drax survey drones had crossed an unmarked boundary at the edge of our solar system. A boundary the Drax did not know existed because we had never told them it did. Within 4 minutes of crossing that line, both drones had been disabled by directed energy systems the galaxy did not know humanity possessed. The other 12 Drax vessels had stopped immediately. They were still there, sitting at the boundary, doing nothing. The Council communication network erupted. My audience was moved to that afternoon. The council chamber was designed to make any single speaker feel very small. I walked to the center platform knowing that was the intention. Around me, in tiered seating that curved upward in a full circle, sat the representatives of over 200 civilizations. Some were broadly humanoid. Some were not. Some communicated through translators that produced a faint buzzing sound. Some communicated through light. I had studied the protocols for 72 hours on the transport, and I still felt the edge of something I refused to call fear. I called it alertness instead. It was more useful. The elder speaker of the Valthor consensus opened the session. She was tall, pale blue, and had the kind of stillness that comes from living a very long time. She looked at me the way I imagined a professor looks at a student who has unexpectedly shown up to class armed. She stated the situation plainly. 2 Drax survey craft had been destroyed by unknown means. The Drax hegemony was demanding censure of Earth. What did humanity have to say? I did not apologize. I opened the display panel built into the central platform and pulled up a document. Not a prepared speech. Earth's historical military record, compiled across all nations from the earliest recorded conflicts through the 21st century. I put it on the main chamber display without commentary and let it run at high speed. Thousands of years of conflict, negotiation, temporary peace, renewed conflict. The numbers were significant. The pattern was undeniable. I let it run for 90 seconds. Then I turned it off and looked at the elder speaker. The Drax vessels were advised to stay away, I said. They did not stay away. Earth responded. Earth stopped. The remaining 12 vessels are unharmed and free to leave whenever the hegemony instructs them to. The chamber was quiet for a moment. Then the Drax representative, a broad, armored being named Commander Savath, spoke loudly enough that his translator had trouble keeping pace. He called humanity's actions an act of war. He called me a representative of a species too primitive to understand what war actually meant. He said the hegemony would not tolerate the destruction of hegemony property by a Class 7 world. I waited until he finished. With respect to Commander Savath, I said, humanity has been conducting war since before the Drax catalogued their first star system. We are not unfamiliar with the concept. Another silence. Longer this time. An archivist from the neutral species called the Soren raised a slender hand. She had been sitting at the far edge of the chamber, and I had barely noticed her until this moment. She was small and very still, and she held a datapad in both hands. Ambassador Okonkwo, she said, her translator giving her words a soft, measured quality, your species' historical record indicates continuous large-scale organized conflict across what duration precisely? Our earliest verified records of organized warfare date back approximately 6,000 years, I said. Evidence of smaller-scale conflict exists for significantly longer. She looked down at her datapad. Then she closed it. She did not open it again for the rest of the session. The council voted to postpone any formal censure pending a full review. It was not a victory. It was a delay. But a delay was enough. I had been on the station for less than 48 hours, and I had already learned something important about the Galactic Council. They were very old, very organized, and deeply uncomfortable with anything they could not categorize. Humanity was giving them serious trouble in that department. The Soren archivist, her name was Elin, found me afterward in the corridor outside the chamber. She walked alongside me without announcing herself, and I let her keep pace. I would like to show you something, she said. What is it? The Grand Archive, she said. The Council's complete record of every species it has encountered, including the ones that no longer exist. I stopped walking and looked at her. Why? She considered the question carefully. Because I think you should know what the records say about civilizations that ignored warnings from species they had classified as primitive. I followed her. The archive was housed in the station's oldest ring. The air was different there. Cooler, thinner, the kind of preserved stillness you find in places that take history seriously. Elin moved through it as though she had spent most of her life there, which she probably had. She brought me to a section the Council's indexing system labeled under a heading that translated to Civilizational Discontinuation Events. The language was deliberately neutral. What the records described was not neutral. 53 cases. 53 instances where a technologically advanced civilization had moved against a world whose inhabitants had been classified as primitive, worlds with resources or strategic position or simple inconvenient proximity. In every case, the advancing civilization had estimated the risk as minimal. In every case, the records described a process of escalating resistance from the supposedly primitive species. In every case, the archive listed the outcome of the advancing civilization under a single clinical phrase: subsequent records unavailable. Not defeated. Not retreated. Subsequently unavailable. I stood in front of case 47 for a long time. The species being integrated had no recorded name in Council archives. They had been too primitive for formal designation. The advancing civilization had been a mid-tier power, well-armed, experienced. The last record of their fleet near the target world was a standard status update. Then nothing. The archive offered no explanation. Nobody investigated. The Council's position has historically been that conflict between a member civilization and a Class 7 world is an internal matter for the member civilization, Elin said quietly. And when the member civilization stops sending updates, the Council reclassifies the system and moves on. She paused. It is more comfortable than asking questions. I turned to look at her. Why are you showing me this? She met my eyes. Because there is one detail in every one of these cases that the Council has never formally acknowledged. She touched the display, pulling up a pattern across all 53 entries. In every single case, the species being integrated issued a warning before the conflict began. A clear, unambiguous warning. In 53 cases, the advancing civilization ignored it. The silence between us lasted several seconds. Humanity issued its warning 4 days ago, I said. Yes, said Elin. I looked back at the display. 53 cases. 53 civilizations that no longer sent messages, built ships, or cast votes in the Council chamber. The archive labels those outcomes as discontinuation events. Does it ever suggest what discontinued them? I asked. Elin was quiet for a moment. The leading historical theory among Council archivists is internal resource conflict. I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, because it was exactly the kind of answer an institution produces when it is afraid to say the obvious thing out loud. They kept fighting back, I said. The primitives. Even when they were being integrated, they kept fighting back until there was nothing left to integrate. Elin looked at me with an expression I was only beginning to learn how to read. It was careful. It was honest. And underneath it, I thought I caught something that might have been relief. The relief of someone who has been waiting a very long time for someone else to say the obvious thing. Ambassador Okonkwo, she said, in my professional assessment, she paused. Yes. That is precisely what happened. I filed a full report to Director Webb that evening. I told him about the archive, about the 53 cases, about the pattern. His reply came back before I slept. It contained 3 words: we know. Keep going. I put the tablet down and stared at the ceiling of my windowless room. Somewhere at the edge of our solar system, 12 Drax vessels were sitting very still. I wondered how long they would wait before they made a decision they could not take back. Not long, as it turned out. The countdown came at 3:40 station time, which was nobody's fault because nobody had been sleeping anyway. I was at my communication terminal rereading the Drax's last official Council submission when the encrypted signal from Earth's Defense Command arrived. It carried the designation Omega Priority, a level I had read about in briefings but had never expected to actually receive. Below the classification header was a single line of text and a digital timer. Fleet in motion. 48 hours. I sat with that for approximately 4 seconds. Then I opened a channel to Director Webb. He picked up immediately, which confirmed he had not been sleeping either. 340 vessels, he said before I could speak. Full colonization fleet. Not a survey mission anymore. The hegemony has gone all in. 340. Confirmed. They're calling it an integration force. Our intelligence suggests they believe the drone incident was a fluke. A lucky shot from a primitive defense system. I stared at the timer on my screen. 47 hours, 52 minutes. Timeline? I asked. 48 hours to the outer system. Longer to reach Earth itself, depending on their formation speed. But Defense Command's assessment is that we address this before they reach the outer perimeter. What does that mean exactly? Webb was quiet for a moment. It means the grid activates when they cross the line. Ambassador. Just like the drones. I understood. I did not ask for more detail. There were decisions being made on Earth that were above my clearance and beyond my authority. And that was as it should be. My job was the Council. I requested an emergency session for that morning. The Council scheduling office came back within 20 minutes, not 21 days this time. 4 hours. The message had gotten through. I spent those 4 hours preparing. Not a speech. Not arguments or diplomatic frameworks or carefully constructed appeals. I pulled a single audio file from the archive of Earth media that Defense Command had loaded onto my terminal. It was a recording from a public demonstration in a major city. I will not name the city because it does not matter. Every city on Earth sounded like this in the weeks after the Drax survey fleet had first appeared at our outer solar system boundary. Millions of voices. Not panicked. Not pleading. Chanting in a rhythm so steady it sounded almost like machinery. The words translated simply, "Not one step back." Over and over. Children's voices in there somewhere, and elderly voices, and voices hoarse from hours of repeating the same phrase. Every language on Earth, producing the same 4 syllables at the same moment. Not one step back. I saved the file to a portable drive and put it in my pocket. The council chamber was full in a way it had not been during my previous appearance. I could feel the difference before I reached the central platform. Every tier was occupied. Species I had not seen in my first session had sent representatives. Some of them, I learned later, had traveled significant distances to be present. Word had spread through the Council network the moment the Drax fleet departure had been confirmed. They were here to watch humanity fold. I knew that. I let myself know it fully without bitterness, because bitterness would have been a waste of energy I did not have to spare. The elder speaker opened the session with the facts as the Council understood them. The Drax hegemony had dispatched a substantial fleet toward a Class 7 system. The hegemony's position was that the prior destruction of survey craft constituted an unprovoked act that justified a formal integration response. The Council was here to determine whether this action required intervention. Then she looked at me. Ambassador Okonkwo, Earth has been made aware of the fleet movement. Does your government have a response? I stepped forward to the center of the platform. I did not speak for a moment. I looked up at the tiers, at over 200 civilizations looking back at me. Some of them enormous. Some of them ancient beyond anything a human mind could comfortably hold. All of them waiting. Yes, I said. But I would like the Council to hear it before I say it. I connected the portable drive to the platform's audio system. I hit play. The sound filled the chamber. Full volume. Unfiltered. Millions of human voices chanting in unison, steady as a drum, patient as stone. Not one step back. I let it run for 30 seconds. I watched faces I was still learning to read. I watched postures shift. I watched Commander Savath go very still in the way that large, confident beings go still when something surprises them. Then I cut the audio. Earth's response to the fleet, I said, is exactly what it sounds like. Commander Savath was on his feet before the echoes faded. His argument was practiced and loud, and I had expected every word of it. Humanity was a primitive species without the legal standing to refuse integration. The hegemony had the right, under Council Charter, to assess, and, where necessary, civilize, any Class 7 world that posed a navigational or developmental concern to established space lanes. He used the word civilize with the confidence of someone who had never had to question what it meant. I did not respond to him. I addressed the elder speaker instead. I would like to ask the Council a question. If a member civilization's fleet approaches a Class 7 world despite a formal warning, and the Class 7 world defends itself, does the Council consider that aggression on the part of the Class 7 world? The elder speaker looked at me with that long, still quality she had. The Council's position has historically been. I understand the historical position, I said. I have read the archive. I let that land for a moment. I am asking about the Council's current position. Today. while a fleet of 340 vessels is in motion toward a world that warned them clearly and was ignored. The chamber was very quiet. Then something happened that I had not anticipated. The representative of the Soren, not Elon, who was an archivist and not a voting member, but the Soren's official council delegate, a being named Oren, who had sat in near-perfect silence through both of my previous appearances, raised his hand. "I submit," Oren said in a voice that carried without apparent effort, "that the council record on Class 7 integration events should be entered into the public session record before any vote on intervention is taken." 3 more delegates raised their hands before he finished the sentence. The Marini. The Chow Collective's dual representatives. A species I had not yet identified who communicated through color shifts across their outer membrane. Commander Savath objected loudly. He called it a delay tactic. He said the fleet had a lawful mandate. The elder speaker looked at him for a moment that lasted longer than it needed to. "The request is accepted," she said. I exhaled slowly so that nobody would see it. The session was suspended for 3 hours while the archive records were retrieved and entered into the formal proceeding. I sat at the central platform and drank water from a container someone had placed there and did not check my communication terminal, because there was nothing I could change and looking at the numbers on the countdown timer would not help. When the session resumed and the 53 cases were displayed for the full chamber, the silence was different from any silence I had heard on the station before. It was not confusion. It was not discomfort. It was recognition. These were old civilizations. Most of them had seen things. They looked at the 53 entries, and they understood what they were looking at in a way that required no explanation. Commander Savath made one more argument. He said that the archive entries were historical anomalies. He said the Drax had conducted 47 successful integrations. He said Earth was Class 7 and the Hegemony's fleet was the most capable force within 6 star systems. Nobody in the chamber spoke after he finished. Then the feed from Earth's long-range sensors came through. I had not arranged this. Defense Command had apparently decided unilaterally to patch the live sensor data into the Council's communication network the moment the Drax fleet crossed the outer solar system boundary. No announcement. No warning. It simply appeared on the chamber's main display, labeled with Earth's coordinates and a timestamp, and every being in the chamber watched it in real time. The Drax fleet crossed the line. What followed was not a battle in any way I had been taught to understand that word. There were no formations, no command exchanges, no moments of tactical decision. The defense platform network that Earth had been building, and placing, and hiding in the outer solar system for the past 16 years, simply activated. Tens of thousands of autonomous platforms, each one networked to the others, each one calibrated to be proportional and precise. For 4 hours, the chamber watched. Nobody spoke. Not even Commander Savath. When the sensor feed settled and the numbers were clear, 291 Drax vessels were gone. The remaining 49 were intact. They were already moving, not toward Earth, away from it. Back the way they had come. Earth did not pursue them. The defense grid powered down. I sat at the center of the council chamber and looked at the display and waited. A Valthor admiral, a being who held a military rank that translated to Commander of 7 campaigns, was sitting 3 tiers up and slightly to my left. I had noticed him when I entered because he was one of the most visibly decorated beings in the room. He had been in wars. He knew what they looked like. He was looking at me, not with hostility, not with fear, exactly, but with something I did not have a word for yet. I held his gaze. He looked away first. The session that followed the sensor feed was the longest I had ever sat through, and I had once spent 18 hours mediating a fishing rights dispute between 3 island nations who agreed on nothing except their mutual irritation with me. This was different. This was over 200 civilizations trying to process something simultaneously. The first response was institutional. The Council's legal committee requested an emergency assessment of Earth's status classification. The existing Class 7 designation was, in the words of the committee's lead assessor, administratively insufficient given observed capabilities. That was a very tidy way of saying that the system they used to rank species had no category for what they had just witnessed. Commander Savath said nothing for the first 40 minutes of the session. When he did speak, his voice had lost the confident projection it had carried before. He said the hegemony reserved the right to review the legality of Earth's defense systems under Galactic Convention. The elder speaker told him, gently, but with a precision that left no room for ambiguity, that the convention he was referencing applied to registered member civilizations, and that the Drax hegemony had acted against a non-member world without council authorization, which placed the question of legality primarily on the hegemony's side of the table. Savath sat down. I watched this and understood that something had shifted in the chamber that would not shift back. The hegemony was not finished. Organizations like the Drax hegemony are never simply finished. But the particular energy they had carried into the situation, that absolute, unquestioned certainty that they were the most significant force in any room, had gone somewhere. I did not feel satisfaction about this. I felt something more careful than satisfaction. I felt the awareness that a very large, very powerful entity had been embarrassed in front of its peers, and embarrassed entities require very careful handling. But that was a future problem. The current problem was the question the elder speaker directed at me during the second hour of the session, in a moment when the chamber had quieted enough that her voice carried to every tier without amplification. Ambassador Okonkwo, your planet successfully repelled the hegemony's fleet. 49 vessels retreated and were not pursued. I would like to ask, on behalf of the full council, why Earth chose not to pursue them. I had been waiting for this question. I had thought about how to answer it during the 4 hours of silence while the sensor feed ran. I had thought about every version of the answer, the strategic one, the diplomatic one, the one that would make humanity sound magnanimous and wise and carefully considered. In the end, I gave the honest one. Because we had no quarrel with the fleet, I said. We had a quarrel with the idea that they were coming here. The fleet was the instrument of that idea. When the idea stopped, the quarrel stopped. The people aboard those ships were doing what they had been sent to do. Once they stopped, they were no longer a threat to Earth. The chamber was quiet. It is that simple, the elder speaker said. It is exactly that simple, I said. Orin of the Soren spoke from his tier without standing. The ambassador's government issued a warning before any conflict occurred. The hegemony proceeded regardless. Earth's response was proportional to the breach of that warning and stopped when the breach stopped. He paused. I would submit to the Council that this is not the behavior of an aggressive species. It is the behavior of a species that means what it says. Commander Savath started to respond. Orin kept speaking. I would further submit that the Council's failure to take the original warning seriously reflects poorly not on Earth but on this body. We were warned. We did not act. Earth acted for itself. These are the consequences of our inaction, not Earth's aggression. The silence after that was very specific. It was the silence of an institution that has just been told something accurate and uncomfortable by one of its own members. The elder speaker allowed it to sit for a moment before moving the session forward. The discussion that followed was long and detailed, and I will not recount all of it because much of it was procedural, and procedural discussions in galactic governance bodies are as slow and repetitive as they are anywhere else. What matters is the shape of it. 3 voting blocks emerged. The first, led by the hegemony and 2 allied civilizations, argued for an immediate threat-level classification of Earth. Not hostility exactly, but formal designation as a potentially dangerous body requiring close monitoring and restricted communication access. The second, which included several mid-tier civilizations that had been quietly watching the hegemony's expansion for decades with their own unspoken concerns, argued for full diplomatic recognition and an invitation for Earth to apply for council membership. The third, which was smaller, but which included the Soren, the Marini, and the Chow Collective, argued for something neither of the other 2 groups had proposed. Leave Earth alone. Not in the dismissive sense of the original Class 7 designation, but in a formal, binding, legally recognized sense. Earth had asked to be left alone. Earth had demonstrated that it was capable of enforcing that request. The appropriate council response was to respect it, document it, and ensure that no member civilization attempted what the Drax had just attempted. Elin found me during the recess between the second and third hours. She did not say anything when she sat beside me in the corridor outside the chamber. She handed me a data pad. On the screen was a single archive entry, separate from the 53 cases. It was an old record, very old, from a period before the Council had developed its current classification system. The species being referenced had no name in the record, only a descriptor in a language the Council's universal translator rendered imperfectly. The translation was, "the ones who do not release what is theirs." Below the descriptor, A secondary note in an archivist's hand, Elon's hand, I realized, though the date indicated she had added it recently. The secondary note said, "See also Earth, Sol System. Added by archivist Elon, Soren, current cycle." I looked up at her. She looked back at me with that careful, honest expression. "I wanted you to know," she said, "that some of us have been paying attention." I gave her back the datapad. The third hour of the session produced no formal vote. What it produced was a motion tabled by Oren and co-signed by 14 other delegates, before Savath could object to the procedure, calling for the Council to formally recognize Earth as a sovereign body outside standard classification. A new category that the Council's administrative office would need several weeks to draft the official language for. The hegemony's representative called it unprecedented. Oren said, very calmly, that unprecedented was not a synonym for wrong. The motion was not voted on that day. Council procedure required a waiting period. But the fact that 14 delegates had signed it within the same session told me something important about the direction things were moving. I filed my report to Director Webb that evening. It was longer than any I had sent before. I told him about the archive, about the 53 cases, about the pattern, about the translation Elon had shown me. I told him about the 3 voting blocks, about the sign motion, and about what I thought the path forward looked like. His reply was brief, as his replies always were. But this one had a line at the end that was different from anything he had sent before. "You're doing something more than diplomacy, Ambassador," he wrote. "You're showing them who we are. Keep going. Don't soften it." I put the tablet down. I thought about 49 Drax vessels retreating through our outer solar system, unharmed, while Earth's defense grid stood down around them. I thought about what that image must have looked like from the outside. Not a civilization drunk on its own power. Not a species that had waited decades for an excuse to demonstrate what it was capable of. A species that had made a boundary. That had held the boundary. And that had walked away the moment the boundary was respected. I thought about the Council's legal committee trying to find a classification for that. I almost pitied the committee. Almost. Before I slept, I sent one more message. Not to Director Webb, to Elon. The translation of that old descriptor, the ones who do not release what is theirs. In English, we have a simpler word for it. I paused. Then I wrote the word, tenacious. She replied within minutes. 3 words, "I will note it." 1 year later, almost to the day, I stood at the podium of the first formal Earth Council summit and looked out at a room that should not have existed. Not because it was impossible. Not because the diplomatic groundwork had been particularly difficult. It had been very difficult, actually, but difficulty is just a description of effort, not an obstacle to outcome. The room should not have existed because 12 months earlier, the most optimistic projection from Earth's own diplomatic team had placed a meeting like this approximately 40 years in the future. The galaxy had moved faster than we expected. We had moved faster than we expected. I think, if I am being completely honest, we had moved faster than we expected because nobody on either side of the process had been comfortable slowing down. Let me tell you what happened in the months between the sensor feed that ended the hegemony's fleet and the summit where I stood. The Council's administrative office took 4 weeks to draft the language for Earth's new classification. They went through 17 versions. I know this because Elon kept me updated with dry, precise notes that somehow managed to convey the administrative committee's profound frustration without explicitly saying so. The final language designated Earth as an independent sovereign body of the First Order, a category that had never existed before and that the Council's indexing system had to create a new branch to accommodate. It was not membership. Earth had not applied for membership and was not being offered it. What it was, in practical terms, was recognition. Legal, formal, binding recognition that Earth existed, that Earth had rights, and that those rights would be respected by any civilization that intended to remain in good standing with the Council. The Drax hegemony signed the recognition document. This took 9 weeks of internal hegemony deliberation, 5 rounds of Council mediation, and 1 private meeting between myself and Commander Savath that I had not expected and will not fully describe here. What I will say is that Savath, in private, was different from Savath in the Council chamber. He was not warm. He was not apologetic. But he was honest in a way that public posturing does not allow for. And in the end, I think we understood each other in the way that 2 people understand each other when they have been on opposite sides of something real. He signed the document on behalf of the hegemony without further ceremony. It was the first time the hegemony had formally recognized the sovereignty of any world it had not militarily subjugated. Their historians had no precedent for it. Several of them published essays in the following months attempting to frame it in terms that preserved the hegemony's dignity. The attempts were not entirely successful, but they were made, which was itself a kind of progress. For civilizations requested joint research partnerships with Earth within the first month after the recognition document was signed. Not military partnerships. The Soren wanted to study Earth's autonomous defense network from a purely architectural standpoint. Elon told me their engineering department had determined that the simultaneous network activation of tens of thousands of coordinated platforms was something they had theorized was possible but had never observed in practice. The Marini wanted to establish a formal xenolinguistic exchange program. Their linguists had apparently been working through recordings of the human voices from the chanting audio file I had played in the council chamber and had found the acoustic structure of human crowd vocalization unlike anything in their database. The Chow Collective was interested in something more specific and more surprising: conflict mediation methodology. The Chow had been watching us. Not our military capacity, our negotiating behavior. The way humanity had issued a warning rather than a first strike. The way we had stopped when we could have continued. The way I had, in their assessment, consistently refused to match emotional escalation with escalation of my own. They wanted to study how a species that had been in continuous conflict for thousands of years had also, apparently, developed somewhere along the way an instinct for knowing when to stop. I did not know how to explain that one. I sent the request to Director Webb, and he forwarded it to a team of conflict researchers at 3 universities, who were delighted to accept the assignment. The summit itself was Webb's idea, technically, though I had been pushing toward it for months. Neutral ground. Structured agenda. Full council attendance invited but not required. Earth delegation of 14, including myself, 3 scientists, 2 military observers, 2 economists, a historian, a linguist, a medical officer, and a chef. Because Webb had argued convincingly that food was a form of diplomacy that had been working for humanity since before we could write it down. The chef, whose name was Oliver Grant, caused more genuine positive attention on the station in the 4 days before the summit opened than all of my diplomatic communications combined. Beings who had spent centuries developing elaborate food protocols of their own were fascinated by the process of human cooking, the variety of it, the way Oliver moved through a kitchen with the ease of someone who had never once considered that feeding people might not be the most important thing he could do. He fed delegations from 19 species over those 4 days, adapting ingredients and preparation methods with an instinctive creativity that I watched and felt proud of in a way I had not expected. The human capacity for adaptation, I was learning, was not only a military characteristic. The summit opened on a Tuesday, because Earth runs on Earth days regardless of where it is. And I stood at the podium and looked out at the room and thought about the 4-word message that had started all of this. I had been asked to give an opening address. I had written 3 versions of it on the transport to the station. I had practiced the 3rd version, which was polished and appropriate, and said everything that needed to be said without saying anything that might complicate the weeks of negotiations ahead. When I stood at the podium, I did not give the 3rd version. I folded my notes and put them in my pocket. 1 year ago, I said, Earth sent a 4-word message to this council. I have been asked several hundred times since then to explain what those words meant. What was behind them? What strategy or calculation or political framework produced a response that simple? The room was listening. Over 200 delegations, plus observers, plus Earth's own 14 people. All of them quiet. The honest answer, I said, is that there was no strategy. There was no calculation beyond the most straightforward one. We heard ships coming. We asked them not to come. They came anyway. We defended ourselves. They stopped. We stopped. I paused. Humanity has been doing versions of that for a very long time. We are not unique in our capacity for conflict. We are not unique in our ability to defend territory. What I think is perhaps less common, what I think this council has spent the last year trying to understand and classify, is that we genuinely did not want to do any of this. I let that sit. We do not want an empire. We have built enough of those internally to understand what they cost and what they become. We do not want to absorb other civilizations or be absorbed by them. What we want is something that has never required a galactic classification system before, because it is very simple. We want to be left alone to decide for ourselves whether the galaxy is worth knowing. I looked at Oren, who was sitting in the third tier to my left. He had his hands folded on the desk in front of him. In the last year, I continued, we have started to think it might be. There was a long silence. Then Oren inclined his head very slightly in my direction. It was a Soren gesture. Elin had explained it to me months earlier. In Soren culture, that particular inclination of the head was not applause. It was not agreement, exactly. It was the gesture used between one honest person and another to acknowledge that something true had just been said. I returned it imperfectly, because human necks are not built for precise Soren angles. But I returned it. The negotiations that followed lasted 11 days. They were hard and detailed and full of moments where I thought we were going to lose a day's progress over a single phrase in an agreement clause, which is how all real negotiations go. We argued about communication protocols, about resource survey rights in disputed zones near Earth's outer system, about the terms under which Earth might participate in Council deliberations without being bound by Council majority votes. On the 8th day, the Drax Hegemony's observer, not Savath, he had sent a junior delegate, which I considered a measured act of good faith because it meant he was not there to fight, requested a private meeting with me. The junior delegate's name was Noraveth. She was young for a Drax, which still meant she was significantly older than me, and she had none of Savatha's performed confidence. She was direct in a way that felt almost familiar. She said the Hegemony wanted to know if Earth would be willing, at some point in the future, to allow a Drax observer to study our autonomous defense network. Not for replication purposes. For understanding. The Hegemony's senior engineers, she said, were having difficulty accepting that the network had functioned the way it had without a central command system. I told her I would take the request home. She thanked me. Then she said something I had not expected. The commander asked me to tell you something. Off the record. I waited. He said that in 47 integrations, no species ever sent a warning first. They always waited until the fleet arrived and then either surrendered or resisted in the moment. He said he had never before had to think about what it means that humanity warned us first. She paused. He said it changed how he thought about the fleet. He does not think he would use that information strategically, which is why he is willing to share it. I thought about that for a long moment. Tell Commander Savath, I said carefully, that humanity issues warnings first because we have been on the receiving end of attacks without warning more times than we can count. We know what it feels like. We decided a very long time ago that we would not do that to others if we could avoid it. Noraveth was quiet. He will find that answer difficult, she said finally. I know, I said. It is supposed to make him think. The summit concluded on the 11th day with a signed framework agreement that established Earth as a formal recognized independent body, outlined the terms of Earth's limited participation in Council proceedings, established the joint research partnerships, and created a new diplomatic channel between Earth and the Galactic Council that would operate on the same encrypted frequency as humanity's original forward warning. Webb was at the signing. He had flown out for the last 3 days of the summit, which was unusual for him. Webb was not a man who traveled far from the center if he could avoid it. He stood at the edge of the room during the signing and watched with his arms crossed and the expression of someone who is trying not to show that they are moved. Afterward, when the room had emptied and it was just the two of us and Oliver Grant, who was packing up the last of his equipment in the adjoining space, Webb came and stood beside me and looked at the signed document on the table. You did something more than you were sent to do, he said. I did what the situation required, I said. That is not what most diplomats do. Most diplomats do what the brief says, I said. I improvised. The forward message was improvised. I just followed its logic. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, the history books are going to be very interesting. I will leave that problem to the historians, I said. Oliver appeared in the doorway with a container in his hands. I have leftover bread, he said. Is anyone interested in leftover bread? I was. I took a piece and ate it standing at the table where the most significant document in Earth's diplomatic history was drying. And it was the best thing I had eaten in 11 days, which is something I attribute entirely to the bread being excellent and partly to the fact that it tasted like home. 3 days after the summit closed, Earth sent a second message to the Galactic Council. Same encrypted frequency as the warning. Same universal broadcast format. The signal reached every listening post, every council station, every registered receiver in the known galaxy within minutes. This time, the message was 6 words. The door is open. Knock first. I was on my transport home when it transmitted. I watched the council network's traffic data on my terminal and waited. The first reply came from the Soren, which surprised no one. Then the Marini. Then 23 others within the first hour. Then, in the second hour, something that stopped me cold. A signal from a Drax receiver on the official Hegemony diplomatic channel. Formatted correctly. Addressed to Earth's diplomatic office. It said, "Request acknowledged. This is the Drax Hegemony. We would like to arrange a formal visit." I sat with that for a long time. I thought about the 4 words that started this. I thought about the 53 archive entries and what they said about species that did not listen to warnings. I thought about Oliver's bread and Elon's careful notes and Noraveth saying, "The commander found that answer difficult." I thought about millions of human voices chanting in the streets of every city on Earth, steady as a drum, patient as stone. Then I thought about something smaller and quieter. In all the months of sessions and negotiations and formal proceedings, I had never been given a window in my delegation suite. I had noted it on the first day and said nothing. On the morning before I boarded my transport home, I found a message from the station's facilities office waiting on my terminal. It said that a modification had been made to the human delegation suite. Effective immediately, the interior wall facing my sleeping room had been replaced with a full panoramic viewport. I went and looked at it before I left. Deep space. Stars. The pale edge of the red star that the station orbited. Very quiet. Very old. Very large. I stood there for a while. Then I picked up my bag and went home. The years that followed were not simple. The framework agreement required constant maintenance. The joint research partnerships produced unexpected friction and unexpected breakthroughs. The Drax Hegemony sent a diplomatic mission to Earth exactly as promised, a small vessel, unarmed, carrying a delegation of 7. Commander Savath was not among them. He had been promoted to a position that kept him far from human space. Noraveth led the delegation instead, and she brought a gift, a detailed survey of the Drax's own defense network architecture, offered for comparison purposes. Earth's Defense Command spent 3 months analyzing it. They found 17 vulnerabilities that the Drax had not known existed. They reported them back. The Drax fixed them. That was the beginning of something that neither side had a name for yet. Elon published a paper in the Council's official historical journal. Its title was Warnings and Consequences, a reassessment of civilizational discontinuation events. The paper documented the pattern that she and I had discussed in the archive, 53 cases, 53 ignored warnings, and argued that the Council's failure to take warnings seriously constituted a systemic institutional failure. The paper was controversial. It was also widely read. Several Council members proposed formal reviews of their own archival holdings. I did not attend the session where that proposal was debated. I watched it from Earth, on a secure feed, drinking coffee that was not cold for once. The motion passed. On the 10th anniversary of the 4-word warning, Earth held a small ceremony. Not a celebration, a remembrance. The names of the Defense Network's designers were read aloud. The names of the diplomatic team. The names of the millions who had chanted in the streets. And, at the very end, the name of one other, Commander Savath, who had died the previous year. The Drax Hegemony had sent Noraveth to represent them. She stood at the back of the room and did not speak. When the ceremony ended, she approached me. "He never stopped thinking about your answer," she said. "The one about why you warn first." "I know," I said. "He said it was the most difficult thing anyone had ever asked him to sit with." I looked at her for a moment. Sitting with difficult things is how change happens. Not all at once. Slowly. One person at a time. She inclined her head, a gesture she had learned from humans, not from her own species. "That is what we are learning," she said. Slowly. The galaxy did not become a peaceful place. The Galactic Council did not transform overnight into a perfect institution. New conflicts arose. Old tensions flared. But something had shifted that could not be undone. The Council's classification system was revised. The term primitive was retired from official use. A new category was added, sovereign independent. Earth was not the only world to hold it, but it was the first. And somewhere, in the diplomatic archives of 200 civilizations, a single four-word message remained on record. Stay away from Earth. It was studied in diplomatic academies across the galaxy. It was cited in legal arguments about the right to self-defense. It was, Elon once told me, the most analyzed short-form diplomatic communication in Council history. I was not sure how to feel about that. It was just 4 words, written by people who were afraid, who were determined, who were refusing to be small. The same people who built a defense network in secret, who listened to the galaxy for months without being heard, who chanted in the streets until their voices gave out. The same people who, when the door finally opened, chose to say, "Knock first," instead of something else. I thought about the viewport in the delegation suite, the one that had been added after the recognition, facing the stars. I thought about what it meant that someone, somewhere in the station's facilities office, had decided that humans deserved to see out. Small things, I had learned, were not small. They were the shape of larger things, visible at the edges. Today, I live in a small house on the coast of Ireland. The sea is grey most mornings. I drink coffee and watch the waves and answer messages from Elon, who still sends me notes about archive entries she has found. I do not miss the station. I do not miss the negotiations or the chamber or the long hours of procedural debate. But I miss the work. The work was good. The work mattered. And somewhere out there, beyond the boundary that humanity drew in the dark, the galaxy is still learning to knock. I think that is enough. I think that was always the point. The stars do not care. They never have. But the beings who watch them, they care. Some of them. Enough of them. And that, I have decided, is the only thing that ever really needed to change. The door is open. They are knocking. We are answering. That is the story. That is everything. 15 years after the forward warning, a young human diplomat named Elena Vasquez stood before the Galactic Council to request something unprecedented. Earth had never asked for membership. Earth had never wanted membership. But now, Elena argued, the distinction between member and recognized sovereign had become meaningless. Earth had been cooperating with Council species for over a decade. Joint research stations orbited a dozen worlds. Drax engineers worked alongside human defense teams. Soren archivists had catalogued human history in the Grand Archive. The line had blurred. "I am not asking for a seat at the table," Elena said. "I am noting that we have been sitting at the table for years. I am asking the Council to update its paperwork." The chamber laughed. It was not mocking laughter. It was something else, the sound of old institutions recognizing that the world had changed and that they had changed with it. The vote was unanimous. Earth became the first species to be granted full Council membership without ever having applied for it. The ceremony was brief. The elder speaker, a new one, the original had retired, read the resolution aloud. I watched from Earth, on a secure feed, as I had watched so many sessions over the years. Elon was in the chamber. She caught the camera's eye and inclined her head, the Soren gesture for "something true has been said." I returned it. I did not know if she could see me. It did not matter. Oliver Grant opened a restaurant on the station. It was called The Warning. The menu changed daily. The reviews were excellent. Beings from over 40 species came to eat his bread and argue about politics and learn, slowly, that food was a language everyone understood. He retired after 20 years. His sous chef, a young woman from the Chow Collective who had never eaten solid food before arriving on the station, took over. The restaurant kept the name. Noraveth became the Drax hegemony's first ambassador to Earth. She served for 12 years, then returned home to write a book about human negotiation methods. The book was titled The Warning That Changed Everything. It was required reading at the Drax Military Academy. Commander Savatha's grandson, who had been a child when the fleet turned back, graduated at the top of his class. Elon was promoted to Chief Archivist of the Grand Archive. Her first act in the role was to add a new entry to the civilizational discontinuation records. It was not about a civilization that had disappeared. It was about a warning that had been heard. The entry read, Earth, Sol System. Issued warning to Drax hegemony. Warning was disregarded. Warning was enforced. Outcome, recognition, cooperation, and a new category in Council classification. Subsequent records available. Extensive records. The archivists are still processing them. I am old now. My hands shake when I pour coffee. My knees ache in cold weather. But I remember. I remember the cold cup in my office when Webb gave me the tablet. I remember the windowless room and the chant that filled the council chamber. I remember the viewport that appeared on my last day, facing the stars. I think about that viewport often. Someone, somewhere in the station's facilities office, decided that humans deserved to see out. Not because they had asked. Because they had earned it. Earned is not the right word. It is too transactional. What humans did was not a transaction. It was a refusal. A refusal to be small. A refusal to be silent. A refusal to be taken. The galaxy learned that a warning can be more than words. It can be a boundary. It can be a promise. It can be a door that is open if you knock. I go outside most nights. I look up at the stars. They are the same stars that watched humanity take its first steps, make its first mistakes, send its first message. They do not care. They never have. But the beings who watch them, some of them care. Enough of them. The door is open. They are knocking. We are answering. That is the story. That is everything. I go back inside. The coffee is cold. I do not mind. Cold coffee is how this started. Cold coffee is how it will continue. The work is not finished. It will never be finished. But for now, it is enough. For now, we are enough. The galaxy has its warning. The galaxy has its door. And humanity has its place among the stars. Not because we conquered. Not because we demanded. Because we asked to be left alone, and when they came anyway, we showed them what that meant. The stars do not care. But we do. That is the difference. That is everything.